So I want the explanation introduction first. So, despite a variety of publications in the past 12 years describing and exemplifying systematic approaches to developing listening skill for foreigner language learners. For the example, Anderson and Leach in 1988, and the Ross in 1990, and the McDonough et al. In 2013, and etc. Little has changed in that period in the type of listening activity provided in the majority of widely used course books. The typical textbook provided the following stage in a listening test, according filed in 1998. The first is pre-listening for context and motivation, and the next is extensive listening, and the next is questions to establish the situation, and the next is preset question of preset text, and the next is intensive listening, and the next is review of questions or text, and the next is inferring new vocabulary. So, Phil laments that the model used by textbook is a product model in which success in listening is measured by correct responses to questions or tests, as opposed to a process model in which teacher would follow up incorrect responses in order to determine where understanding broke down and to put things right. 14 years later, filed in 2012, is still characterizing typical listening lesson in a very similar way and is still criticizing the approaches for being product focused rather than process oriented. According to book in 2001, comments that most classwork done on listening skill is bottom up rather than top down. By this, he means that there is a concentration on knowledge of the smallest elements of the incoming sound streams, such as phonemes or individual words, at the expense of wider issues such as general knowledge or experience of the world, as well as needing to develop listening strategies. And skill learners also need exposure to language in use in order to facilitate its acquisition, according to Tomlinson in 2013. And one of the best ways to gain such exposure is through extensive listening, an activity much neglected by coursebook and teacher.
Okay, I'm going to tell about what our textbooks providing. In order to understand more clearly what textbooks have been providing in the way of listening activities, there are 5 intermediate level students' books were examined. The first is L. Source and G. Source, 1996. The title is New Headway English Course, Oxford University Press. The second is S. Cunningham and P. Moore, 1998. The title is Cutting Edge, Longman. The third is S. Kai and V. Jones, 2000. The title is Inside Out, Macmillan Heinemann. The fourth is H. Diller and A. Walkley, 2010. The title is Outcomes, Heinle. The last is B. Goldstein, 2012. The title is The Big Picture, Richmond. The first 50 pages of each book were studied to discover what kind of activities were being offered related to the recorded material. In the 5 books, there were 155 such activities. The first is listening for specific information. The second is listen and check. The third is pronunciation practice. The fourth is clues. The next is answer questions from the recording. Next is reading text and listen, and the last is other. Okay, the next slide. Listening activities in any given course book only represent a part of the potential listening opportunities in a textbook-based lesson. Other opportunities are provided by simple classroom language, such as following the teacher's instructions, or by what are often referred to as speaking activities, where the students are involved in an information exchange. However, the fact that textbook authors provide such a limited range of listening activities points to a lack of a systemic approach to listen skill work.
So the next is what should textbook be providing? According to Ross in 1991 has used a division of listening activities into 4 broad types. So the first one is attentive listening. For the example activity, the learners have to give short, verbal and non-verbal responses to the speaker in a real-time interaction. So the second is intensive listening. For the example activity, the learners are focused on particular aspect of the language system to raise awareness of how they affect meaning. So the third is selective listening. The example of activity, the learners concentrate of specific piece of information learning to attend selectively to what they heard. And the last is interactive listening. For the example of activity, learners are helped to become activity listener by working in pairs of small group with information gap, problem solving, and type activity.
White 1998 categorizes listening skills into 5 broad areas. The first is perception skills. The example of activities are recognizing sound and intonation and identifying reduced forms. The second is language skill. The example of activities are identifying individual or group words and building meaning for them. The third is using knowledge of the world. The example are connecting words to non-word linguistic features to get clues to meaning, and using knowledge topic. The fourth is dealing with information. The example are understanding gist meaning and inferring information which is not specifically stated. And the fifth is interacting with speaker. The example are copying with speaker variation such as speed and accent, recognizing speaker intention, and identifying speaker mood. Both authors give the example that can be adapted to all levels by guarding the text and or the tasks. And the next is suggestion for additional approaches to developing material for listening skill. The first is source of input. In a main course book, they use CD or cassette, but in real life, they use face-to-face or foreign speaker For example, students in Japan who learn listening skill, they learn listening through cinema. They listen their announcement, which is spoken in English. It's not difficult for course book to develop their listening activities. They can use some people to be their sources of input, such as teacher, other teacher, learners from the class, learner from other the class, official speaker in public speaking, people interviewed by the learners, discussion groups outside the school, and videos from courses and from the web.
Additional type of relevant input. So to make listening skill better, there are some activity for foreign learner which do not often feature in a course book. Okay, number one is taking part in discussion with friends about topic in interest and concern. Number two is listening to announcement, for example, announcement in airport, in a station, or at sport event. Number three is listening to radio programs for enjoyment and for information. Number four is listening to music for enjoyment. Number five is listening to stories and jokes. Intake-rich activity. According to Tomlinson 2013, ideally what learners need to listen to is the target language being used in the text, which are effectively and cognitively engaging in ways to which facilitate intake. So there are some listening activity which have potential for achieving rich intake of language. First is listening to teacher reading poems, short story, extracts from novels, and etc. Number two is listening to the teacher telling jokes and anecdote. Number three is listening to other learners doing prepared presentation on something which really interests them. Number four is watching sport event, news events, documentary, and etc. with commentaries in the target language. And the last is listening to presentation or discussion, debates on conversation topics relevant to the learners. Ways of facilitating intake. To make ways of facilitating intake, we should make our own multidimensional mental. Multidimensional mental. So what is multidimensional mental? Multidimensional mental is a principle that using imagery to process or to producing language. Okay, ways of helping learners to achieve multidimensional representation of what they listen to include: first is building up listening confidence by using a total physical response in which the learners respond physically to instruction spoken by the teacher. Number two is building up listening confidence by not testing learner at lower level on what they have not understood, but giving instead opportunity to make use of what they have understood. Setting homework tasks which involve learner listening experientially, and the last is giving instruction on how to listen experientially prior to a listening test.
And the next one is ways of developing listening skills. The best way of helping learners to develop listening skills is to ensure that the learners are exposed to a wide variety of listening genres and text types to provide Will's listening tasks similar to those suggested above for facilitating intake. In addition, it is useful to make use of a combination of the following approaches. The first one is teaching learners about a particular listening subskill. For example, listening for gist, listening for specific information, listening in order to infer a speaker's attitude, and then providing activities in which they can use those sub-skills. And the second one is getting learners to do a listening task in which they can learn for a specific purpose, and then focusing on the strategies which could have helped them before providing another similar listening task. And the third one is getting learners to do a listening task in which they can listen for a specific purpose, and then asking them to think and talk about the skills they use before providing further similar activities. The fourth one is giving learners a listening task in which they listen for a specific purpose and getting them to think and talk about what skills and strategies they will use before they begin the activity. And the last one is giving learners a listening task in which they listen for a specific purpose and getting them to think and talk about what problems they had with the activity before providing guidance and setting them another similar activity. And for the next slide is explaining about example of multi-dimensional listening skills lessons. So in a listening lessons, the teacher can ask one of the students to tell the class about their first experience about a particular activity during a lesson. For example, about mountain climbing, appearing on stage, or driving a car, or anything else. And the teacher can also play a recording after that, which gives information about something where the students should listen and take notes about anything which they think is useful or interesting. And then after that, in groups, the students will have to discuss about a type of location they would like to visit together in the same group. For example, in Betu, Africa, and plan their trip before presenting it in front of the class, while the other groups are told to listen to them carefully so that they can evaluate their work afterwards. So the main point of this lesson is that the learners can gain a lot of experience of different types of listening from different types of listening from different input sources.